So in this video lecture, I'm going to be discussing prosocial behavior, which is chapter 11 in our textbook. And we're going to be looking at some theories on why people perform prosocial behavior. Prosocial behavior is helping behavior, right? So let's talk about some basic definitions. If you think of prosocial behavior as any act performed with the goal of benefiting another person, that's prosocial behavior. So it can be getting someone a drink of water, it can be saving someone from a burning building. Any sort of behavior that you're helping another person out is called prosocial behavior. And this is a little bit different from altruism. Altruism is the desire to help another person, even if it involves a cost to the helper. So, for instance, prosocial behavior could be just helping someone that doesn't cost you anything, but altruism is when there's a cost to you. Say, for instance, you give a stranger your coat on a cold winter day, so that there's going to be a cost to you as the helper because you're going to be cold, but you want to help out this other person. That would be altruistic behavior of you. Let's talk about what this means in terms of firefighters and ambulance drivers and people who are working in the line of duty. Yes, they are performing helping behaviors. They are doing things with the goal of benefiting other people. But they're not altruistic behaviors because they're getting paid, so this is their job. Now, if they go above and beyond the call of duty, that is like a lot of the 9/11 rescuers actually took their lives into their hands to run into the buildings when they were on fire. So they were taking great personal risk, and many of them perished. That was very altruistic behavior. That wasn't just what they needed to do, what they were getting paid to do. They were going above and beyond the call of duty. All right, so that differentiates prosocial behavior, any helping behavior, and altruism. Altruism being that there's a cost to the helper. All right, so let's try and differentiate between altruistic acts and acts of behavior that are just helping behavior or prosocial behavior. So I'm going to put one up here, and then you look at it and decide whether you think it's altruism or just helping behavior. First one is donating blood for money. Altruism? Helping behavior. Helping behavior, right? Because you're getting paid to donate that blood, so it's not altruistic because there's a benefit to you. Signing an organ donor card. Altruism or helping behavior? Helping behavior and altruism, because there's no benefit for you, right, of being an organ donor. Okay. How about a firefighter rescuing a child from a burning home? Altruism or helping behavior? Helping behavior, because that firefighter is getting paid. That's his job, to rescue that child from the burning home. An education major signing up to be a peer tutor, helping behavior or altruism? Helping behavior, because there's benefits in it for the education major, right? A student reporting a fellow student's cheating on a test, helping behavior or altruism? That's an interesting one. It's definitely not altruism because there's no cost to you. I guess there's a cost if they know you did it. But it's neither a helping behavior nor altruism. How about listening to your sister's boyfriend woes? Oh, well, that's a really nice thing to do. So yes, it's helping behavior, probably altruistic behavior if there's no benefit in it for you. Donating unwanted food to a food bank. Helping behavior? Yes. Altruism? Maybe. But if it's unwanted food, then it's probably not an altruistic act because it doesn't sound as though you need it if it's unwanted. So it's probably just prosocial behavior or helping behavior. Okay, last one. loaning your roommate $20 until the next check comes in, your roommate's next check comes in. Altruism or helping behavior? Definitely helping behavior, probably altruism if there's no benefit in it for you. Okay, so I hope this sort of helped to differentiate between altruism and helping behaviors. So social psychologists have really applied 3 different theories to try and help explain prosocial behavior. Evolutionary theory, social exchange theory, and empathy leading to altruism theory. And we will discuss each of those in detail. So the first theory that social psychologists have used to explain prosocial behavior or helping behavior is evolutionary psychology theory. And this is a theory that hinges on human instinct and genes, right? So Darwin's theory of evolution says that natural selection favors genes that promote the survival of the individual, because the genes that further survival and also increase the probability of producing offspring, so they're likely to get passed on, right? So if genes have a lower chance of survival, then they are less likely to be passed on through offspring. So evolutionary psychology attempts to explain social behavior in terms of genetic factors that evolve over time according to these principles of natural selection. So Darwin was the first who said early on that he realized that there was a problem in terms of evolutionary theory. How would it explain altruism? Because there's lots of examples of altruism which would seem to go against evolutionary theory. How is that? Well, if people's overarching goal is to ensure their own survival so that their genes survive, why would they ever help others at a cost to themselves? That is, why would they ever do altruistic behaviors? Genes should promote selfish behavior because that way they're more likely to get passed on. So you would think that evolutionary psychology would not explain altruistic behavior. Well, we do see that behaviors that help a genetic relative, we can make a case for those being favored by natural selection because you share genes with your genetic relatives, and so if you help your genetic relatives, then that maybe makes sure that your genes get passed on. So it does make sense that natural selection should favor altruistic acts that are directed towards genetic relatives. So what this is called is kin selection, okay? So according to evolutionary psychology, prosocial behavior occurs in part because of this kin selection. And if you look at the research, there is research to support this whole idea of kin selection. Survey research has found that people are more likely to report that they are more likely to help genetic relatives than non-relatives in life and death situations, such as a house fire. And we have lots of anecdotal evidence from real emergency that's consistent with these results. People did not report that they would be more likely to help genetic relatives when the situation was not life-threatening, so which also supports the idea that people are most likely to help in ways that ensure the survival of their own genes. Okay? Interestingly, both males and females and both American and Japanese participants followed this rule of kin selection in life-threatening situations. Okay? So for example, survivors of a fire at a vacation complex reported that when they became aware that there was a fire, they were much more likely to search for family members before exiting the building than they were to search for friends. Okay? So another idea in relation to this is the reciprocity norm. And this is the expectation that helping others will increase the likelihood that they will help us in the future. So those most likely to survive, the argument goes, were people who developed an understanding with their neighbors about reciprocity. I will help you now with the agreement that when I need help, you'll return the favor. So anyway, because of its survival value, this norm of reciprocity may have become genetically based. Okay, how about group selection? Well, natural selection operates on individuals. People have traits that make them more likely to survive or more likely to reproduce and pass on those traits. Natural selection also operates at a group level. So if your selfless behavior or altruistic behavior benefits the group, then that would also lend that altruistic behavior to being explained by evolutionary psychology, being explained by group selection. All right, so that's it in terms of evolutionary psychology explaining altruistic behavior, the idea. So the second theory that social psychologists use to explain prosocial or helping behavior and altruism is called social exchange theory. Social exchange theory is different from evolutionary theory because social exchange theory doesn't trace the desire to provide helping behavior, doesn't trace it back to our evolutionary roots, nor does it assume that our desire to be helpful is genetically based. Social exchange theory basically says that this is all about maximizing our rewards and minimizing our costs in our relationships with others. So we're always trying to figure out how we can maximize our rewards and minimize our costs, even in terms of our social relationships. So this is an old news clip, so I want you to pause this lecture and read this very quickly and then start it up again. So pause and take a minute to read this. Okay, so this is a story of an early hominid prosocial behavior. It's very intriguing to think about in terms of how the different theories that explain prosocial behavior would look at it, okay? So evolutionary psychologists might argue that the caregivers helped the 3-foot individual because he was a relative, and that people are programmed to help those who share their genes. There again, the whole notion of kin selection. Social exchange theory would maintain that the dwarf's caregivers received sufficient rewards from their actions to outweigh the costs of caring for him. So that's how social exchange theory would explain this behavior. Now, the third one that we haven't really talked about yet, the Empathy-Altruism Hypothesis, would hold that the caregivers helped out this person because of strong feelings of empathy and compassion for him. So this last way to explain the altruism is supported by the interpretations that's in the article's final paragraph, where it says he was found buried in the floor of a cave in the arms of another person, a woman who was 40 years old, so possibly his mother, right? So anyway, that's an interesting way to think about the compare and contrast sort of the three theories of helping behavior. Let's talk a little bit more about social exchange theory. So this is, again, the whole idea of that we think of our social relationships in terms of our costs, minimizing our costs and maximizing our rewards. So in terms of helping behavior, how would this work? Well, helping can be rewarded in a number of ways. It can be rewarded by causing the norm of reciprocity to be there. If it increases the likelihood of someone helping us in the future. Helping could also be rewarding in terms of an investment of the future, that someone will help us when we need it. It could also be rewarded in terms of if we are a bystander and we feel empathy for someone, then helping that person is going to be rewarding to us because it's going to relieve our distress. It also is rewarding if we get social approval for it, if it bumps up our self-esteem and increases our feelings of self-worth. Those are also ways that helping behavior can be rewarded. On the other side, in terms of the costs of helping behavior can be costly. It can cause us to put ourselves in physical danger if we're trying to rescue someone, and we have to jump in a churning river to rescue them, or go into a burning house, or maybe we have to rescue them from somebody who's beating them up, and we might get beat up in the process. It could cause us pain. What if we're trying to carry somebody who's hurt, and it causes us pain to carry them? It could cause us embarrassment, right? We might decide to help out somebody who it puts us in an embarrassing situation to help them. It could cost us time, right? Which seems silly, but people highly value their time, okay? So according to social exchange theory, helping behavior decreases when the costs are high, okay? So social exchange theory ultimately argues that true altruism does not exist, that people only help when the benefits outweigh the costs, okay? So this is interesting to think about. So considerable evidence indicates that people are aroused and disturbed when they see another person suffering, and that they help, at least in some part, to relieve their own distress, okay? So perhaps Abe Zelmanowitz, who stayed behind with his friend Ed Baya, who was disabled, in the World Trade Center office where they both worked, maybe he stayed behind with him. The story is he was waiting for another person to come help him carry Ed out, and the World Trade Center tower fell before they either could be rescued. But maybe he just found it too distressing to walk away and leave his friend there. So this would still be explained by social exchange theory, because it would say that the cost of walking away was just too great, and so that would explain why he did the altruistic thing of staying with his friend. Okay. All right. So helping behavior actually occurs in virtually all species of animals. And as you'll see in this picture, sometimes it even crosses lines of species. This is helping behavior by a gorilla. This happened actually when this child, this little boy, actually fell into the gorilla enclosure at a zoo. And the gorilla actually gently carried him to one of the doors where he knew that the human zoo employees could get to the little boy. So essentially, the gorilla rescued the little boy. So why did the gorilla help? Well, if you were you're looking at this from an evolutionary perspective, you would argue that prosocial behavior is selected for and becomes part of the genetic makeup of members of many species. That it was that prosocial behavior was there because of it had been selected, those genes had been selected over generations. Social exchange theorists would argue that this gorilla had been rewarded for helping in the past. And in fact, she had been rewarded for helping in the past because they actually had to do some training with her on how to be a good parent. The zookeepers did, because she was rejected from her mother early on, and so they taught her how to parent children by caring for a doll, and she was rewarded for caring for that doll. So that might help explain. She was looking for a reward like she had been rewarded in the past. So interesting to think about. So let's think about what the third theoretical perspective is on helping behavior. And that's what we call the Empathy-Altruism Hypothesis. Well, empathy and altruism, so this is what? The pure motive for helping, okay? So a researcher that went by the name of C. Daniel Batson in 1991 really was one of the biggest proponents of this idea that people help purely out of the goodness of their hearts. When people are empathetic, when they can put themselves in the shoes of another person and experience events and emotions from that person's point of view, then they tend to attempt to help that person purely for altruistic reasons, regardless of whether they have anything to gain. Again, that empathy-altruism hypothesis is when we feel empathy for a person, we will attempt to help that person truly for altruistic reasons, regardless of a gain for us. So here's a fun little diagram. This appears to be maybe a homeless person, someone in need of help. A person is walking by, she sees him. Does she feel empathy for this person? If she does not, no, then she will only help if it's in her own self-interest to do so. Like, say, for instance, there are people there observing her, and so she gets a reward for in terms of how they think about her, or in terms of how the man thinks of her. If she gives him some help, she's giving him some money. Here's $1, she says. That would be the way it would work if she did not feel empathy for him, possibly. Or, yes, if she felt empathy for him, then she's going to help him regardless of whether or not it's in her self-interest, even if there are costs that outweigh rewards. And you see her saying here, please come stay at my house tonight, and then we'll find you a place to live. So she's being very altruistic, right? So this is one way that the empathy-altruism theory works, is it basically says that if you don't feel empathy, then social exchange concerns come into play, okay? So if there's something in it for you, something to be gained, such as obtaining approval from the man or from onlookers, then you will help the man. If you don't profit from helping, you will go on your way without stopping, okay? So actual research that has supported the empathy-altruism theory. This is a piece of research where they looked at conditions that people agreed to help Carol with the work that she missed in her introductory psychology class. So in the condition where empathy was high, you see that's the high empathy condition on the right, people helped regardless of the costs and rewards. That is, regardless of whether or not they would encounter her in their psychology class, okay? So why is that a cost or reward? Well, if they didn't, it might be a cost because they might feel guilty if they ran into her in their psychology class. But if they had high empathy, there wasn't much of a difference between whether or not they would encounter her. So there was not much difference in terms of costs and rewards between the people agreeing and not agreeing in terms of the social exchange. But in the high empathy group, they both helped about the same amount. In the low empathy group, you'll see there's a big difference in terms of the blue and red bars. The blue bar being that they would get a reward because they would see Carol in class. So even though they didn't have much empathy for Carol, they had a good reward for helping because they would see her in class and she would be so thankful and blah, blah, blah. The cost also would be that if they saw her in class and they hadn't helped her, then they would feel guilty, right? So this study lent support to the altruism empathy hypothesis. So to wrap up sort of the lecture, there's basically three. You can think of the three theories. You can think it in terms of three basic motives underlying prosocial behavior. If you're looking at it from an evolutionary psychology perspective, then your motive is to pass on your genes, okay? If you are looking at it from a social exchange theory perspective, then your motive is to maximize your rewards and minimize your costs in your social relationships. If you're looking at it from the empathy-altruism hypothesis perspective, then you're going to say that your motive is that your powerful feelings of empathy and compassion led you to selflessly give, right? So that was your motivation. Okay, all right, very good. Each of these three approaches, the evolution of psychology, the social exchange theory, and the empathy-altruism hypothesis, they each have their supporters and their critics. But that's it for this lecture, all right?